Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 election Student Reflections panel for the National Conference of Black Political Scientists. My name is Sidney Johnson. I'm a senior legal communications major from Howard University. Our panel will cover a wide range of topics, including voter turnout and suppression, Black women and communities of color, and many other things like the youth vote. Tonight, we have a bright group of students who are dedicated to studying political trends and elections in some way, shape, or form. Our guests today include Noemia, Baptista, Tanisha Dublin, Kayla York, Rainey Wilson, Jalen Davis, and Trey Edgerton. So why don't we begin with introductions? We're going to start with Noemia.
Yes, thank you so much, Ms. Johnson. I'm really excited to be here, and thank you for being our illustrious moderator today. I also want to thank first and foremost God for blessing me and all of us with this opportunity, and of course also the National Coalition of Black Political Scientists for inviting us to speak on this panel today. It's a great honor and my esteemed pleasure to be here. My name is Noemia Baptista. I'm a senior at the University of the District of Columbia pursuing a political science degree, and I'm also a tax analyst for the district government. My passions are extremely multifaceted, but in particular, I strive to dispel the false narratives imposed on Americans regarding the true parallels of slavery and racism in order to achieve the economic imperative. But thank you again, Ms. Johnson, so much for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Noemia. I want to just echo you and the sentiments, and thank you all for having us today as well. Thank you so much, Ms. Johnson, for an amazing job that you're doing with us. My name is Tanisha Dublin. I'm a senior as well at the University of the District of Columbia. I'm a political science major. I'm currently a district government worker. I'm a compliance specialist. And my passion that stems for politics comes from my grandparents and just knowing that they survived the civil rights movement, hearing their stories and knowing what they had to overcome. My passion is to truly just become a legacy of change for not just my family, but for future generations to come.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. First, I want to thank Dr. Scott for allowing me the opportunity to be on today's panel. My name is Kayla York. I am a senior at Howard University, pursuing a dual degree in economics and political science. I'm currently a student, but my career aspirations as it relates to politics range from going into the law. I have dreams of going to law school and pursuing a MBA along with that, to hopefully eventually go into technology and see how our policies and politics will relate to this new world of growing technology. Thank you.
My name is Rainey Wilson. I'm a junior legal communications major and philosophy minor from Chicago, Illinois, studying at Howard University. First and foremost, I would like to thank you, Ms. Johnson, for moderating our panel today and the National Convention of Black Political Scientists, as well as Dr. Scott for allowing me to participate. I'm currently an intern with the Ronald Walters Leadership in Public Policy Center. I plan to pursue law in the future, and I'm passionate about social equity and fighting to bridge the racial wealth and inequality gap in the United States. So thank you for having me today.
My name is Jalen Davis, and I'm currently a student at Howard University studying legal communications. Last year, I started interning on Capitol Hill, where I developed my deep interest for social justice and relieving poverty, which is where my passion and career meet as I want to run for Congress and assume the position as a district attorney. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Hello, everyone. My name is Trey Edgerton. I am a senior political science major, legal communications minor at Howard University by way of St. Paul, Minnesota. And one thing as far as my career, I am also at work in the executive office for the National League of Cities currently, and I'm pursuing a Juris Doctorate at the Howard University School of Law this fall. And really, my passion for politics stems in my understanding and my experience as a Black man and how racism has influenced public discourse and legislation to the detriment of my community. And I just want to be in the same rooms to create opportunity for people that look like me.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. We're going to start off with a simple question that everyone can answer. What was your reaction to the 2020 election, the results in comparison to 2016's results? And what does this presidency mean to you? We're going to begin with Noemia again.
Listen, first off, it smells like hope and healing outside. The Black community has suffered a lot the last 4 years, and I'm not going to be the only one to admit that it's been very emotional. It's taken a huge mental toll on all of us. We've been disheartened by the blatant publicized racist remarks made by our very own president, which incited national hatred towards the Black community and people of color. And it's not to say that we've been hopeless, but we've just had a little less hope, and that's okay. But as James Baldwin once said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. This is our time. President Trump is no longer in office. We now have President Biden and the Queen, Vice President Kamala Harris, a force to be reckoned with, a woman living in her true God-driven divine purpose, an inspiration for us all. And for me as a Black woman living in the United States, that means so much more to me than I can ever explain, because we're a double minority. We're Black and or people of color, first and foremost. And secondly, we're women. And that in itself has unleashed a whole new level of power that we've been slept on. And we didn't truly believe that could happen based off American history. But I say all of this to say, get ready. There's a change coming. Things are never going to be the same, and we're coming out on top this time. Thank you.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Tanisha.
Awesome. Well, my initial reaction to this election and the results, I'm just overwhelmed with joy and gratitude to see that all the hard work, all the people that have, not just the people that are here working now, but the people who have paved the way before, other women, other people that, I've seen, been able to witness and talk to, the ground floor, the working at the elections, anyone who played a small part or a large part, just gratitude is what I'm overwhelmed with. And this election, posed several challenges, just to echo some of the things that Noemia said, the different challenges that we had to face, not to mention being in the middle of a pandemic, just this victory felt like a victory, not just for some, but for all. And, right now I feel hopeful. I feel hopeful to see healing in our country, to see the division that was sown up through this whole entire election season, even just last election, to see the healing. I'm prepared for that to come. I am looking forward to what's on the other side. So I am just grateful. I am hopeful, and I'm ready to just work harder than ever before.
My initial reaction to the 2020 election results were yay. We do not have Trump as president, regardless of anyone's political affiliations. I think that entire administration didn't stem around the ideals of what we would hope for our children and our future. So as Generation Z especially, I was super excited to be able to participate in this presidential election. This is my first time voting, so it was very exciting for me. Obviously, via mail-in ballots, it all looked very differently, but I think it was a really well put together campaign. I love to see how everyone came together to support one cause, and really just super excited, like everyone else has said so far, to see what hopefully 2022 and 2024 has in store for my generation and generations to come with political activism.
Yes. Well, the year 2020 brought upon unbelievable and unprecedented challenges that have ultimately tested the strength of US institutions, which demanded action and sacrifice from our democracy. From the COVID-19 pandemic, racial division, protests, and social uprisings, along with economic inequities and an accelerating climate crisis, I believe that the 2020 election was one of the most important in modern history. This was definitely translated through the voter turnout, as it was the highest it's ever been in over a century. More Americans voted in this election, and I hope that the Biden-Harris victory was enough to show Americans that their vote truly does count and that it does make an impact. Personally, it was such a profound feeling witnessing Kamala Harris make such a historic step as the first Black woman to be elected into the second highest office in the country. And her being a Howard alum especially hit close to home for me. In addition to this, a record number of Black women were elected to Congress in 2020. And this is really important to me because whenever Black people enter into legislative spaces, they really do have the opportunity to change the narrative, and that's really important for us. To me, the most important thing about this presidency is holding Biden and Harris accountable. Yes, we've succeeded in getting rid of fascist Trump, but obviously the fight does not stop there, and it's far from over.
So I agree with you. So when Trump won the 2016 election, I knew that it could only lead to disaster, which is exactly what happened. I was very saddened and concerned for our country. And as I mentioned before, being a legal communications major with the career goal of relieving poverty and advocating for social justice rights, it was very exciting to see Biden and Harris win this election because of our shared interests on the issues. So to me, this presidency is a huge step in the right direction because there's so much work that still needs to be done. Being able to vote out the Republican Party was the first step we needed to tackle before we can get anywhere else. On a personal aspect, it was very inspiring to see Howard alumna Kamala Harris make it to the Oval Office. Here at Howard, we are taught to believe that we can do anything we set our minds to, and seeing one of us actually make it to the second highest position in the United States is a huge deal and leaves me very inspired. This election, I'm hopeful and excited to see our leaders implement the changes that need to be made.
So in comparison to the 2016 presidential election in which I could not vote, I feel a lot significantly better voting in the 2020 presidential election for a former member, my own team. I'm the president of the Howard University speech and debate team, and Vice President Kamala Harris was a member. So for me, it is when we talk about representation and you think about just what it means to have a bison in the White House, it lets me know that if she was in the same spot as me, then I can do it as well. And my other teammates can go and climb and rank and truly achieve what the so many people call the stereotypical American dream. But in actuality, it's pursuing equity and it's pursuing a higher office, knowing that we are here to create change. And so that's what I hope. Looking forward to this president in this next administration is a lot of great change, and that the people that are representing us are truly holding our best interests.
So a good number of us on this panel are members of the 18 to 24-year-old voting group. What issues do you guys believe compelled young voters to come out so strong this year, participate more in this election versus other ones in previous years? We're going to start with Rainey.
For the turnout for the presidential election among young people ages 18 to 24, it reached about 55%, which is substantially higher than the 45% youth young voter turnout in the 2016 election. So young voters, specifically Black and Latino youth, were definitely critical to the 2020 Biden-Harris win throughout battleground states like Georgia and Arizona. Issues such as the ongoing impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the protests against police brutality ultimately helped shape how young Black voters view issues and propelled them to show up and vote at the polls. Black youth in particular are disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as the government's response to it. And this past summer, young people took to the streets to protest racism and police violence in response to the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, Ahmaud Arbery, and the list goes on. So these are a few of the critical issues influencing young people to go out and vote. However, I think it's really important to note that the priority issues among youth voters greatly differ by race and ethnicity. So the top issues of concern for Biden voters were the COVID pandemic, racism, and climate change, in contrast to young Trump supporters whose issue priorities range from the economy, the pandemic, and then abortion.
Thanks, Rainey. Next, we'll have Trey.
Yes, so in terms of the different issues facing the young adults, or the youth turnout, I would say personally, if you just think about the political climate that we are in today, in the past 4 years, the Trump administration enabled a lot of racist rhetoric to be spewed not only from government officials, but enabled those that were oftentimes in recent years, having came off 8 years of a Obama, a Democratic ran presidency, that they now feel enabled and entitled to have these sort of negative opinions and views on minority groups. And I think right now, as far as major issues facing us as a generation, is the environment. And in more recent years, unfortunately, environmental policies have become partisan. And it has been oftentimes the Democrats, and at least in the Joe Biden administration, there has been a focus to try to combat climate change and to look towards renewable resources and to decrease America's carbon footprint. Another issue that goes in hand with that is the plague of racism, systemic racism in our country. And when you combine those two, environmental, social justice, you see that individuals, specifically our age group, care a lot about the planet that they are going to live in. And the people in the areas within this planet, they care that they want to ensure that everyone has an equal opportunity and equal access to a good life.
What barriers do y'all believe kind of inhibited or posed a challenge for some young people throughout their effort to get out to vote? I think Noemia wanted to take this one.
Yes, definitely. So there are obvious factors that have contributed to the prevention or challenge of voting, but I wanted to focus on one area I've heard about from several young voters that isn't highlighted enough. The stereotypes projected on the youth about how they're apathetic and disengaged politically is a driving factor of why some, but not all of them, are reluctant to politics. But in reality, if you actually sit down and have a conversation with them, you listen to their political beliefs, they're very much engaged and they're aware of everything that's happening. And not only that, they're actually talking about it. In the past, we haven't necessarily come across an experience like this. And maybe this is just stemming from my own personal disengagement from when I was younger, but I don't recall a call to action like that of the 2020 election. Now, we were in despair and we were desperate for change, desperate to get Trump out of office. And The Atlantic actually publicized an article that pretty much summed it up perfectly, that the youth, especially millennials, they're so open-minded that we sometimes make contradictory statements because we can see and, more importantly, understand the pros and the cons to certain political agendas. So for the last few years, we've been so focused on racial equality and police brutality, which is not only a moral issue, but it's become a political one because it incited grave and international concern. But one of the biggest issues that millennials have with politics today and our government is that we don't see today's government as the best venue for performing our civic duty. And before we can perform, we need to reevaluate our principles and our governmental structures to reestablish a strong foundation, and then we can progress from there. So I say all of that to say, I've spoken to multitudes of young people and got their opinion on politics. And the majority of them say that the stereotypes against them make them want to disengage. But ultimately, they have that understanding that no change will come if it's not confronted. So they're here and they're active and they will continue to be active. So I am very optimistic with the future and how engaged they're going to be.
I know with the pandemic this year, there was a lot of early voting, there was a lot of mail-in ballots, and it was kind of a lot larger than it was in previous years. So do any of you believe that early voting and mail-in ballots kind of impacted the election results in like a positive or negative way? You can just explain your answer.
Absolutely believe in a positive way that early voting and mail-in ballots were definitely a major proponent in this year's election results. I was doing some research on the Pew Research Center, and more than 50% of those votes that were cast for this election were absentee and mail-in ballots. Not to mention just the different tactics of voter suppression that we noticed, not to mention the polling locations being closed, and just along with many other challenges that took place. I actually had the opportunity to volunteer this year, as I've been an active voter since I turned 18, and being able to work in the polls and be there to help assist the young people, the people who were first time voting. And it was just amazing. But to see the amount of challenges that took place, many people were being turned away because they could not collect the ballot for other people. Many cities, many counties had to come up with really quick plans, knowing that they went from 200 voting sites to down to maybe 70. So trying to put all of those individuals in one location, giving them contingency plans with no knowledge of mail-in voting ever, posed so many different challenges. But even in the midst of those challenges, I am grateful to see that the results that we were looking for still played out. So moving forward, I would love to see this same response, if not more, so that we can get more people registered, more people can, not have to be inconvenienced, especially when you think about people who are disabled, people who are not driving, elderly people who cannot make it to the polls. This is just a level of convenience and comfort knowing that it worked and that the results were there. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this will pan out the next time.
Yeah, amazing. I know you spoke a little bit about the challenges of this election, and I think that every year in every election, unfortunately, there's a lot of instances of voter suppression tactics being used across the whole of the United States to suppress specific people's votes. It's very targeted. So have y'all been able to identify any types of voter suppression that were used in this election in particular? And if so, what tactics do you think were being used?
So voter suppression has always been, and it's still prevalent across the United States, especially when it comes to the 2020 election. So politicians they've been passing measures deliberately to make it extremely difficult to cast a vote. And voter registration restrictions is on the front line because it's one of the most common methods of voter suppression. And it also varies by state. So for example, in New York, they require voters to register 25 days prior to the election, which is a discouragement and a huge wall that keeps them from being able to exercise their right to vote. And especially in a call to action like we just saw, where their vote had to be counted last minute. I also remember a report from the ACLU that stated over 90,000 New Yorkers were unable to vote because their applications didn't meet the deadline. And not only that, but my own personal experience, right? So with mail-in voting, I am a transplant living in DC, but I am originally from Rhode Island. My overnight application for an absentee ballot was lost for days, and I sent it in days before their deadline. I had to call multiple times for them to even find the application. And then I was posed with another problem that they had to mail me the actual ballot, and then I had to return it within that given allotted time frame. And when I overnighted my ballot, again, a second overnight, they lost my ballot again. And then I had to call, and this time I was not as nice. I had to use a stern voice, and I had to tell them, you don't know what my vote means. My vote makes a difference. You have to find it. How do you lose an overnighted ballot? And they ultimately found it the day of the deadline, approaching the time of the deadline. So I just say that because my own personal experience was just clear evidence of voter suppression.
If I could add into that, just several different tactics, even in the legal system and the way that the federal government has used to restrict people, certain types of people from voting. So currently there are 36 states that have voter identification requirements at the polls in particular. And within that group, 7 have very strict government issued ID regulations where you have to have one particular type of government ID that not every single individual has. In fact, there are over 21 million individuals in the America that do not have government issued IDs. So those people automatically do not qualify to vote. Another large component facing the Black community is that of felony disenfranchisement. So immediately, if you get a felony, 9 times out of 10, depending on your state, there's essentially every state except 2 that are in the Northeast, you can no longer vote if you have that felony statement. And as many people know, that there are disproportionate amount of Black members, Black people that have been impacted by the criminal justice system, and therefore they are not eligible to use that right. And even more recently, in the aftermath of Georgia turning blue, in the Georgia House of Representatives, the Republicans, they unveiled a bill that essentially would limit absentee votings on Sundays. And that is a day, specifically in the Bible Belt, where Black churchgoers would go to the ballot box as part of the Souls to the Polls voting drive. So that specifically targets and attacks the Black community. And all these different tactics, whether through the federal government or local government, have all been used specifically to limit the Black community from having a voice and deciding who essentially runs their community.
I'm happy this question was posed because voter suppression showed up a lot in this past election. The Voting Rights Alliance documented 61 different forms of voter suppression performed in past elections. What caught my attention while I was reading these 61 different forms was these 4 things that Americans faced throughout the state during the 2020 election. One being 10-hour waits. So in the suburban areas of Georgia, thousands of voters had to wait hours just to cast their ballot during early voting, and it is very clear who it inconvenienced. Long lines disproportionately affect wage workers who don't get paid time off to vote, and because Americans are relying on these wages to live, leaving the line because it is too long and getting back to work is their only option. 2 being long drives. In rural parts of America, voters may have to drive for hours to reach an in-person polling station. For example, a Native American voting rights advocacy group says that many Native Americans living on reservations have limited access to voting. In Nevada, for instance, members of the Pyramid Lake must drive almost 100 miles round trip to get to the closest early voting location. In Arizona, a lawsuit filed by members of the Navajo Nation asked for extra time to get postal votes in because there's only just one post office every 707 square miles. The government does not provide transportation for these citizens to post offices to vote, so therefore it is a huge interference with voting rights, which in the end turns into voter suppression. 3 being restricting the voting rights of felons. Most states restrict the voting rights of felons, but some states automatically restore voting rights after the sentence is served, while others wait until after probation and parole is served and after all fines have been paid. In 2018, Florida restored the voting rights of 1.5 million nonviolent felons. Soon after, the state amended the law to say that felons must prove they have paid all fines and fees before they vote. Another example is former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg donated $16 million to help the fines and fees of 32,000 Black and Hispanic former felons because restricting the voting rights of felons became such a huge problem in election results. 4 being student voting restrictions. So as this was mentioned before, I wanted to bring it back up because I am a college student who faced problems voting this election, and 2, because I saw many of my peers struggling as well. So one huge problem that us voters face is our school ID not being accepted. And since these are universities' way of giving us valid ID, it tends to be confused when and where these IDs are valid.
When we start talking about voter suppression, one version of voter suppression, it can be argued, is the Electoral College. It always comes into the discussion. Can it still be used in today's times? Is it, just an old thing from the past? Is it keeping the popular vote from actually being the voice of the people? So do any of you think that it is still fit for today's world, or do you think it kind of skews the election results in a negative way? I think Rainey wants to take this one.
I do not believe that the Electoral College system is still fit for purpose today, and that it indeed does unfairly skew the result. In order to understand this concept, I think we have to point out the reality that white votes have always held undue weight in elections due to the institution of poll taxes, voter ID laws, and ultimately voter suppression to prevent or discourage racial minorities from voting. So these institutions were put in place to sustain white political power. And the Electoral College system is just one institution that does so, but in an extremely covert form. So the Electoral College often benefits majority white rural areas of the country to the disadvantage of larger states with diverse and urban populations. And this issue is only increasing with time. During this time of income inequality and disparities across different states, systematically, the Electoral College overrepresents the views of relatively small numbers of people. Each state has 2 Electoral College votes, regardless of size, plus additional votes depending on the number of House members. So automatically, this flawed system overrepresents small states at the expense of larger states. So, for example, a state like Wyoming that has a white population of 92% compared to California, which is only 37% white, based on the Electoral College, voters in Wyoming have 4 times more power than a voter in California. So that automatically shows that race inevitably plays a role in this. Also, under the Electoral College, a president can be elected despite their opponent receiving a larger popular vote. 5 times throughout the US history, the winner of the popular vote lost the Electoral College. And I feel like having a president who lost the popular vote ultimately undermines electoral legitimacy. And in other words, the Electoral College is undemocratic and it must be abolished.
Another point that we also know kind of sways election results is the media. We all know it primes and frames the things that are, most salient at the time. So what role do y'all think that the media played in voter turnout or even just the election in general this year? You can talk about social media because that's kind of a new thing that people are just now having to study, and its influence on, even this whole new fake news thing. JaLynn, you can go ahead.
So yeah, this was a very important question to be asked because this is our first election with this many people engaging in social media. So since the 2016 election, apps like Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat have become even more popular, causing celebrities to have more of an influence on them because of their platform. These past few years, we have also seen more and more celebrities gauge an interest in politics and try to pursue a career in the political field. Social media and celebrities contributed a lot this past 2020 election. Every day, we saw new celebrities posting about who they are voting for and why you should too. We saw heart-touching campaign ads that these celebrities were able to provide the money for them to be made. And overall, celebrity presence was very strong and influential during this election, and it is why voters actively engaged throughout. Social media highlighted many social justice issues like mass incarceration and police brutality, which ultimately united the Black community and influenced us to get out and vote any way we can. We saw films made by us for us to learn our history and for us to understand why we need to be more active than other voters. We listened to powerful cultural music and poetry shared throughout social media that encouraged us to take control of our voting rights. Celebrities are able to get through to all demographics and, more importantly, have a way of persuading Americans into doing whatever they want us to, which luckily it was to vote. Because of this powerful presence of social media and celebrities in the 2020 election, we were able to secure a Democratic win. I think that social media served a very important purpose in the 2020 election, and if we want to secure another win like this, we are going to have to continue the use of these platforms.
So as I mentioned in my introduction, as someone who's really interested in tech policy, law, and business, and how they're all going to interact with each other in the future. I think social media definitely played a big role in our election results. As someone who really favors technology and think that it can be a tool used in the future to continue to have different voting demographics more knowledgeable about the elections and more encouraged to vote. I think we're going to see it a lot in the future. I think from my perspective, social media is really a great tool for my generation and generations to come. So naturally, we're more liberal leaning. So that's really going to be the Democratic Party biggest pull by finding ways to appeal on social media and, like JaLynn mentioned, using different celebrities to utilize their platforms to encourage us to vote is going to be a tactic that the Democratic Party should continue using. That's how you could stay up to date on vote by mail initiatives and the whole propaganda behind fake news, that was coined by our former President Trump, is this idea that the news is fake. And obviously we know that not to be true, but news can easily be framed. Social media can easily be framed. And like I mentioned before, because my generation is more liberal leaning and we're really heavy on social media apps like Instagram and Twitter, it naturally seems like fake news to more conservative politicians, because we're going to promote, and you're going to see topics that trend. There are more democratic topics, and obviously we have CNN more liberal leaning than Fox News, and so he's always going to support Fox News that rally behind his propaganda. I personally believe that social media obviously needs to correlate with politicians and find a middle ground. I think, like I said, it's a great tool, it's a great tactic. But because of this idea that some people think that news is fake or social media is fake, it's going to create a clash. It's going to create a clash. No news is fake. It's all about how it's being framed. And I think in the future, it's going to really play a big role in allowing Democrats to have an upper hand.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kayla. I definitely will co-sign that. I think media is an effective tool, both negatively and positively in swaying the thoughts of the general public. There was also kind of a significant amount of gratitude shown towards Black women this last election cycle, and specifically for their push to get people out to vote. Can some of you speak on the efforts, as y'all identified, were made by Black women to promote the most civic engagement possible throughout the election? And what tactics do you believe were most notable? Go ahead, Rainey.
Yes. I think this is an important topic to bring attention to because Black women were the Democratic Party's most powerful voting group in the 2020 election. And we're often overlooked and taken for granted despite being the backbone of our democracy. Black women were on the front lines of the election, doing everything possible to ensure that all eligible voters were present at the polls and making their voices heard. And according to exit poll results, about 91% of Black women voted for the Biden-Harris ticket. That being said, we must acknowledge the efforts of Black women in battleground states. For example, the efforts carried out by Stacey Abrams and her team in Georgia were crucial to the Georgia voter turnout as she fought passionately to expand and defend the right to vote for people of color. Her goal was to ensure that voter suppression in Georgia did not dictate the outcome of the 2020 election, and she succeeded. She helped turn Georgia blue, making Joe Biden the first Democratic candidate to win Georgia in nearly 3 decades. Because of her efforts, she's now a household name. Latasha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, she also played a significant role in promoting civic engagement throughout the election. She organized the Black Voters Matter national outreach tour across more than a dozen Southern and Midwestern states leading up to the election in hopes of increasing voter registration and turnout. Many more Black women in battleground states like Florida and Philadelphia, they worked tirelessly to educate and empower voters in historically Black communities. In addition to this, I must acknowledge the efforts made by the women of the National Coalition on Black Civic Participation, the NCBCP, as they have been investing in these efforts for more than 10 plus years. For example, the Georgia Black Women's Roundtable of the NCBCP, they worked diligently this election cycle, canvassing, holding events, online live streams, as well as having so many different engaging things set up at the polls. So overall, Black women were all hands on deck, doing everything they could to mobilize and turn out the Black vote. And the Democratic Party definitely has Black women voters to thank for this victory. That being said, Black women now expect results because these consistent efforts must not be taken for granted.
Oh yeah, no, I think I went to one of those events that you were talking about. It was really, really great, really amazing. I'm gonna turn to Tanisha now.
Yes, thank you so much, Rainey, because you have hit like so many points that were just absolutely amazing. And when you think about Black women and our role in democracy as a whole, you know, I would be remiss if I didn't mention, you know, some of the women who came before. You know, when I think about the, you know, the Fannie Lou Hamers, the I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, you know, we're tired, and Black women have always gone overlooked for so many years, that this election season, and just to see the number of Black women, like you said, Rainey, you know, we are expecting results. You know, being a millennial myself, you know, going through and seeing some of the oppression. I mean, I would be remiss also if I didn't just hands down give a congratulations to Stacey Abrams, because she did not allow a defeat to stop her force and her fight. You know, she continued to fight. She had a grassroots approach. You know, reading her book, Lead from the Outside, you know, was just an amazing, you know, inspiration to me, because I now want to do even more. You know, I want to keep my feet to the ground, making sure that we are heard. You know, Black women need to be heard. We do not need to be hidden figures anymore. You know, we are out in the forefront. You know, I am wearing my pearls in honor of, you know, our Black vice president that we all made sure was going to get into that office. So, you know, these women are paving the way, and I'm super excited to be a Black woman in 2021, moving forward, to really make sure that our voices are heard, not just now, but for future generations.
So I'm just going to ask a blanket question for you all. Do you consider this year's election cycle to be a kind of success for communities of color or not? Please explain your answer. And we're going to start with Noemia.
So, yes, I just want to take a moment to applaud the Black community, because this is what I've been saying we need to do for the last few years. People underestimate the power behind collective action. It cannot be combated if it's driven by true purpose and genuine intentions. And take a look at this past summer with the protests against police brutality in the midst of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and all the others. We all joined together. We incited change. Thousands of people traveled across the US, across the world, to come to DC to contribute their support and their passion behind the movement. Look at how Stacey Abrams and her team in Georgia went door to door with the utmost patience to explain the significance behind voting, not only in the presidential election, but also runoff, state, and municipal elections. And I remember reading an article that explained the power behind the Black vote. So Black Americans represented 50% of all Democratic voters in Georgia, where only 30% of their population is Black. 20% of the Democratic votes in Michigan, where only 14% of the population is Black. And then 21% of Democratic voters in Pennsylvania, where only 12% is Black. And this just goes to show that if there was any doubt about how powerful the Black community is, there shouldn't be any more. And to the Black community, we no longer have an excuse. We are aware of our resilience. We are aware of our power. We're backed by God. We know who we are. We know our true purpose. We will fight and rise again and again, as we've always done. But keep in mind that this is different. We're in a season of eliminating vicious cycles, and this perpetuating vicious rhetoric of racism needs to be destroyed. And at this point, we're all hyper aware and more passionate than ever to do so. Probably not in my lifetime, because change takes time, but we will prevail without a doubt. Absolutely.
I believe that, not just the Black community, but just minority communities as a whole, I would say really played a major impact, and they should be proud. I am proud to be a double minority, in America, because our voices, like you said, have been heard. We know what we need to do. Coming together is something that we have to do. There is no more thinking or question about it. All minorities need to come together. We all need to have roundtable discussions to see what our issues are so that we can organize together, so that we can come together, set plans, put them in place. We know what to do, and this election season showed that we know what to do. When you put our backs against the wall, we're going to come out fighting every single time. So I am just, amazed at the results. So I am grateful. I am grateful, a sense of gratitude, and I just want the momentum to keep going.
I second that. I definitely want the momentum to keep going. In terms of this cycle being a success for communities of color, I am cautious to say maybe. Perhaps I'm really big on policy. And so I really obviously support the Biden-Harris administration, but I look forward to what they do policy-wise, what the Senate and Congress does, especially with our blue Senate and our blue Congress and the blue presidency. I would like to see a lot of policy get passed that really is aimed towards the betterment of our communities of colors. I haven't seen anything yet that's passed. I know recently the climate change, we agreed to get back on that. So that's a good head start, but I wouldn't say this cycle is a total success yet. I'm very happy that we all mobilized and supported one another to get rid of our former president, but I think it has to continue, and it stems behind policy and making sure those things are passed.
As I previously mentioned, the Biden-Harris win really just reveals the power that Black voters have, and I do believe that this year's cycle was a success for communities of color. I think that the election of Kamala Harris itself represents the slow but steady progress made by communities of color to create a seat at the table for themselves in political leadership. In addition to this, the White House cabinet is more diverse than it's ever been before, and compared to the Trump administration, which only consisted of one Black secretary. Taking all of this into consideration, along with the record number of Black women elected to Congress this year, and the substantial amount of organizing that went into making this a reality for us, I hope that all of this has broad and positive implications for the trajectory of American politics.
Throughout this election, we have seen an increase in support for Black-owned businesses, for the protection of immigrants. We have seen a rise in funding for social justice issues. We have seen more representation of minorities throughout this year's cycle, which has resulted in the overall rebuilding of broken minority communities. And for these reasons, I believe that this year's cycle is the biggest success out of any presidential election for communities of color. One thing that the Biden administration is pushing is being able to provide more healthy plant-based foods throughout low-income areas, whether it's through school systems or a change in manual vouchers. This alone is a huge step in rebuilding the minority community because many of us have fallen ill due to the lack of access to healthy foods and also the lack of education on nutrition. Immigration reform is also another issue that the Biden administration is taking the appropriate measures on to reunite families and to open opportunity for immigrants here in America. Immigrants have been discriminated against terribly here in America and punished simply for just wanting a better life, especially by the Trump administration, who went as far as attempting to build a wall that symbolizes hate, but most importantly, rejection. Having our president acknowledge this issue and take a stand on it is a huge success for communities of color. Another pressing issue that Biden and Harris are sure to address is police brutality. As mentioned before, this past summer was very tragic, as we all know, for the Black community because of the devastating, unacceptable police brutality occurring here in America. Being able to select administration who would not encourage the behavior of these officers but prevent it was a huge success for communities of color because we have suffered enough as it is. Winning this election was a success in order to move forward and take necessary steps to building a better America. But Biden and Harris taking office is step one. In my opinion, until Biden and Harris implement changes that will last, we cannot really measure success.
So as far as is this a success for communities of color, I think what we need to define is what our scope for a community of color is. In the grand scheme of things, internationally speaking, the Biden administration has already had several bombers fly through the Persian Gulf, has deported hundreds of individuals in the United States in the past 2 months, and certain promises specifically dealing with the nature of federal student loan forgiveness. He has already stated that he's not going to back the Democratic support plan of $50,000 in loan relief. Now, that is to say that this was necessarily a failure per se, because there have been, as so many, all the previous panelists have said, the large successes that have occurred externally this past year, and in part due to just the pandemic and the racial awakening of America. However, I will say, just in a larger grand scheme of things, we have a lot more to do. So I can't necessarily say that it has been success yet until there's actual, as Kayla said, policy written down and set in stone. And we are actually working towards creating change and not just going back to a government that just functions, but rather a government that works for the empowerment of all people.
Thank you, Trey. I kind of wanted to ask a follow-up question. I think that a lot of the communities of color helped to push, for the Georgia Senate election to kind of come out the way it did. So I know we're always kind of hyper-focused on presidential elections, but that one kind of stole the spotlight and ultimately led to now a majority in the Senate. So it's already seeing a little bit of change. So how do you think we can keep on encouraging these communities to study their candidates and make informed votes in congressional and runoff elections?
Say, as far as just being informed and maintaining political literacy, is understanding that there is more to elections than just your president, that there are several down ballot decisions that actually have more impact on your day-to-day lives than a president. Not to go into the nitty gritty of what a president does, but they are more often than not, they serve as a figurehead, and they sign off on actions created by Congress rather than them producing stuff themselves. So in actuality, if you want change to occur within your community, you have to go to your local congressman, your local state and local elected officials. Me working for the National League of Cities, I understand that local government has a lot more stake in just the quality of life that us as American citizens live, just based off of your city. And just to stay engaged and stay informed in that, it doesn't necessarily mean watching C-SPAN all day or becoming a political junkie, but when it comes time for elections, or when you see a flyer about a certain individual, it doesn't hurt to just use Google. Google is your friend, y'all. And to just search up, Ballotpedia has several just key resources that really just shows you what a candidate is and what they stand for. Too often we just see a name repeated on several ads, and that's the person we vote for. Actually study the candidates that are running for Congress and running for all offices, even down to the school board. And that is how you create that change. And run for yourself.
We have our final question of the evening. It's going to be for all of y'all once again. Looking ahead to the 2022 midterm elections, what do you think is going to be the biggest factor in ensuring that we have the same or higher turnout? I think Trey kind of talked about how you can raise awareness, but if some of you want to go more in depth in that, then go right ahead. I think we're going to start with Noemia just one more time.
Thank you so much. So I think that maintaining the momentum is going to be tough, in my opinion. I don't want to be the one that plays devil's advocate, but history shows that when we win, we become complacent with that win, and we don't feel the need to do anything anymore. And that's just the cold, hard facts. Now, with humanity in general, not just exclusively for the Black community, we do need to come to a realization that in the end, just as James Baldwin has always envisioned, we need to love one another, and that's how we're going to emerge victorious. And then with that, I'm even reminded of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how we need the basic fundamental necessities in order for us to even get to the next level of achieving our greatest sense of self, achieving our highest purpose. But love is a verb and requires action, right? Consistent and intentional action. So we don't stop ever. Never stop talking about voting, never stop talking about the direction that we're headed in, where we want to be, where we've come from, our ancestors, our future, the future of the generations to come. You never stop talking about it, because word of mouth has always been proven to be the most effective way of communication. So never stop loving your brothers and sisters, because at the end of the day, it's not about me, it's not about you, it's about all of us. So collective action, once again, I will always reap on that. Collective action is what makes a difference. So I want to say maintaining the momentum.
So in my opinion, the biggest factor that is going to really assist with 2022 and moving forward, starts with looking in the mirror, understanding where you are, what you know, what challenges you had, for the previous elections. I can personally speak to, when I was 18 years old, I did not know as much as I needed to know going into the polls to vote. However, having, grandparents, parents who were in the household speaking about those things, sharing their knowledge, giving me education, is really what was the backing towards where I am today as it pertains to political science. So, it can start in the home. And like Trey said before on one of his previous answers, Google is your friend. Get educated, get involved. Students, no matter how old you are, you can start learning, so talk to the youth. The youth is our future. So to be honest, I believe that going behind us, pulling youth, the young people up, is going to be a really key factor moving forward, just to teach them. And that cycle, teaching others, will ultimately teach you. So I believe that each one teach one, that saying is necessary at this point, and it's going to be the momentum that we need to keep moving forward for our success.
Continuing to find innovative ways to make voting fun and understandable for young people. Miss Stacey Abrams got it right in Georgia, and I think we should continue to look to her and her ways and how she mobilized Georgia to vote by celebrities and rappers and R&B singers hosting concerts to really get a different demographic of voters engaged. And then once you have them engaged already from that field organizing, I think follow through is the most important. Like you all have mentioned already, we mobilized, we did it. We all came together, different communities of colors and different people who identify in a diverse sense. So now we have to figure out a way to keep them engaged. And I think follow through is going to be the most important part. Politicians need to do what they said they were going to run on. And it all goes back to technology again. If you have one discouraged voter, a part of a younger generation is going to filter over to an entire community of disengaged young voters, which can really hurt the Democratic Party come the 2022 midterms and ultimately 2024. So I think you have to keep those communities engaged, and you do so by finding innovative ways to keep them active and following through on your platform.
I think it's great that we are honing in on this, because what happens in the midterm elections can have just as big of an impact on the direction of the country as does the presidential elections. And I think the biggest issue that lies here is that historically, midterm elections generate a lower voter turnout than presidential elections. And this could be due to the lack of education and awareness, as many people don't even know the names of the candidates running for Congress in their districts. Ensuring a higher voter turnout in the 2022 midterm elections would require the same, if not more, momentum and efforts that were carried out in 2020 from political officials and organizers to educate the masses on the importance of the midterm elections, who their candidates are, important and upcoming deadlines, as well as streamlined voter registration. So this is especially crucial amongst communities of color, low-income Americans, young people, and those with disabilities, in order to decrease the gaps in voter registration amongst those marginalized groups.
In my opinion, chaos created commitment. And what I mean by that is that voters took responsibility to get out and vote solely because America was enduring a chaotic time that caused political engagement. What we need to keep in mind is that there was a global pandemic amongst many other crises occurring during this election, which is why voter turnout was so high. This presidential election, it was necessary to get people to vote because we desperately needed a change. And if we did not need that change, voters would not have came out. And because of that, I genuinely believe that if we do not continue to update and educate Americans on every single aspect of upcoming elections, then we can expect to see a decrease in political engagement, especially in these 2022 midterm elections. Because as I said before, these chaotic events are what drove Americans to politically engage. And once these chaotic events are over, there will be no pressure to vote. We are going to have to work 10 times harder to maintain that voter engagement for the next at least 4 elections. And as Kayla said before, making voting fun and having celebrities engage with voting can only result in more voter engagement. Moving forward, we definitely need to keep communities updated on political election dates and educate them on every aspect of political elections as a whole.
Number one way that we can ensure we have an even higher turnout in the midterm elections is just increasing political literacy across all spectrums. But truly, and the sole meaning is understanding who represents me and are they doing a good job at it. Every single person has access and tools to see what their local representative votes on and the matters that they support. And if that individual believes that the person who is supposed to be voting in their best interest isn't, then they got to go. It's really that simple. So, but too often people don't know who are representing them and they just walk around unassuming. So the more that we remind our local constituents and just the Black community in itself how much their vote matters in these local elected offices, and highlighting and showing the different ways in which local government impacts the lives of these individuals, not only will that increase voter turnout, but that will also motivate the other individuals to go out and run for elected office because they feel that their voice is truly a better representation than the counterpart.
Okay, great. Thanks, Trey, for wrapping it up. There's been a lot of great work done in order to solidify the results of the 2020 election, and there's definitely a lot more to be done, as we head into the midterm. This is what's going to conclude our 2020 election student reflections panel. Thank you to everyone that tuned in to watch, and a huge thank you to the National Conference of Black Political Scientists for allowing us to participate. A huge thank you to all of our mentors in the political science world that got us here today. And also thank you to our panel participants, Noemia, Tanisha, Kayla, Rainee, JaLynn, and Trey, and everyone, have a great night.